If you are moving to Washington, D.C., there are some insider tricks that you need to know so that you don't continue to look like a tourist. They're insider secrets to help you get around the city and enjoy the city, and just things that you probably should know about before you move here. What are the 10 things that you need to know about moving to Washington, D.C.? That's what we're talking about today, and we're starting right now.
I'm Sherri Green with Coldwell Banker. Welcome to my YouTube channel that guides home sellers and home buyers in Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia.
If you are moving to D.C., there are several things you need to know. If you don't know these things, you are going to continue to look like a tourist instead of a native in your new hometown.
Tip number 1, stand to the right, walk to the left.
The first thing you need to know, stand to the right and walk on the left. This is particularly important when you are riding the escalators of the metro. Washingtonians love to walk everywhere, and that includes the metro system too, and the escalator to get down to the metro and the escalator to get back up. When you are riding those escalators, if you want to stand, you move to the right. If you want to walk, you walk on the left. It is notorious for a tourist or someone who is new to Washington to be standing on the left, and here comes the commuters running down the left side of the escalator with their briefcases late to go to work. So remember, when riding the escalators of the metro system, stand to the right and walk to the left.
Insider tip number 2, D.C. has no representation.
D.C. has no representation. You will see it all over everyone's license plate. The district puts it there for you. Taxation without representation. And that's really what it means. We are taxed just like everybody else with federal taxes, yet we have no representation in Congress. Yes, we do have a congresswoman. She essentially has no vote, and we don't have senators. Why is that? D.C. is not a state. We are the District of Columbia. There is a huge push to make D.C. a state, and that might be a cause that you want to get involved in when you get here. But currently, we are a city with a mayor and a city council. Our laws have to be passed by Congress, and we have no representation in Congress. Taxation without representation. It's something you should know before you move to D.C.
Insider tip number 3, do you know what the DMV is?
The D.C. area has a fairly new nickname, and I don't know why no one consulted with a branding firm before they gave it this nickname. It is the DMV.
What?
And it stands for the District, Maryland, and Virginia. The two states and our city get lumped together because we are so close. It is very easy to cross into Virginia and very easy to cross into Maryland, and a lot of people live in an opposite jurisdiction in which they work. So we are constantly commuting back and forth between the three, so it was appropriate for the area to get a name. Now, I don't know why someone didn't take just a minute to think about how that sounds. It sounds like the Department of Motor Vehicles. It should have been the MVD, Maryland, Virginia, the district. Kind of sounds like MVP, which is kind of what we think about our great city.
Yay!
But nevertheless, it is the DMV. So when you hear someone say, I live in the DMV, they do not live at the Department of Motor Vehicles. They live in the District, Maryland, and Virginia area, the DMV.
The next insider tip, navigating the grid.
DC was designed by a Frenchman named Pierre L'Enfant. He designed the city on a grid. All the numbered streets run north to south, and the lettered streets run east to west. Then you have diagonal streets named after the states. This system starts at the center of the capital. So anything north and west of the capital gets the designation of Northwest DC and a little NW next to its address. Conversely, anything south and east of the capital gets a southeast designation and a little SE next to its address. As you go to navigate the city, driving or biking or walking, you want to pay very close attention to the street address and its quadrant so you don't go to the wrong location. Additionally, the circles can be confusing for someone, and When you first get to town, you may find yourself in a circle that you can't get out of, but you will get used to it, and it will make the city super easy to navigate once you figure out that grid system. The other thing to know is this: there's no J Street. We go from I to K. There are a couple of theories as to why there's no J Street. One is that Pierre L'Enfant had a grudge against Chief Justice John Jay, 2 J's, so he didn't name a street with a J to spite him. The other theory is that typographically J and I look so very similar, and being right next to each other in the alphabet, it might get very confusing for someone trying to navigate the city. No matter what the real answer is, just remember the lettered streets go from I to K. There is no J.
Insider tip number 5, the Smithsonian, a world to discover.
The next thing you need to know about when moving to DC is the Smithsonian. And as a tourist, you probably know about the Smithsonian, and there was probably a time as a tourist you thought it was just one museum. Then you discovered it as multiple museums all over the city. The Smithsonian Institution also encompasses the zoo. And that is something that a lot of tourists don't know either. So our zoo is free, just like all of the museums of the Smithsonian Institute. As an insider, however, and as someone who lives in DC, the other thing about the Smithsonian is their wide array of programming, lectures, and excursions. The Smithsonian plans multiple programs all year long. You can take classes related to oil painting and photography. You can sit in on lectures regarding history and food and culture, and you can go on excursions with the Smithsonian Institute to learn about winemaking and hiking. There are a variety of programs available through the Smithsonian Institute that most tourists don't know about and don't know to take advantage of. But as an insider, as a Washingtonian, the Smithsonian Institute's lectures, excursions, and programs are something you really should know about.
Insider tip number 6, the weather.
DC is in an area of the country called the Mid-Atlantic. We're not quite north, and we're definitely not south. We are simply in that Mid-Atlantic region right along the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. With that, we are afforded all 4 seasons. We have hot summers, beautiful springs and falls, and chilly and even sometimes snowy winters. I like to say we get all 4 seasons in equal measure. That doesn't always happen, but we do get all 4 seasons beautifully. So you can enjoy the cherry blossoms in the spring, you can enjoy the really hot weather of summer, you can enjoy the beautiful leaves in the fall, and get in a good snowstorm. Seasons in equal measure, or at least all 4 seasons. That's what the weather is like in DC. Now, some people think that DC is super hot, super muggy, and super humid. I grew up in Georgia. Trust me, it is hot and muggy here, but in Georgia, it starts in June. At least in DC, the hot, muggy weather usually doesn't start till July.
Insider tip number 7, how to get in-state tuition.
So while the district has a lot of universities, American, Catholic, GW, Georgetown, Howard, and more, there's only one state-sponsored university, and that is the University of the District of Columbia. As you go to look at colleges and universities for yourself or for your children, in-state tuition is something a lot of people think about. So when you think about DC, you may think, oh no, there's only the one option. The truth is, there is a program for DC residents called DC TAG, Tuition Assistant Grants, and that allows students to pay in-state tuition at other state universities. So if you are thinking of university, thinking of college, or looking at that for your children, and you are a DC resident, make sure you check out the DC TAG program.
Insider tip number 8, Wonks are only part of our story.
One of the other things you need to know about moving to DC is everyone isn't a political wonk. A lot of tourists think that. A lot of people after you move here are going to ask you about politics. And as you get here, you're probably going to talk a little bit about politics because it is one of the city's industries, if you will. But everybody isn't a political wonk, or everyone isn't involved in politics. There are a lot of industries in DC. We have a lot of tourism and hospitality, as you can imagine. We have a lot of tech and a lot of biotech, especially going out into Northern Virginia. We have Amazon. Their second headquarters is moving here, as you probably have heard in the news. We have Nestle, who moved their entire corporation to Northern Virginia. We have Capital One, who has a huge presence in the Tysons Corner, Virginia area. The truth is, there are a lot of industries and a lot of businesses right here in the DC area. It's not just politics.
Insider tip number 9, what word not to say in DC?
One thing you need to know as a new DC resident, the word Cowboys is a dirty word. And I mean the sports team. One of the biggest rivalries for the Washington football team, formerly called the Redskins, is the Dallas Cowboys. So if you are a Dallas Cowboy fan moving to DC, you probably already know this. But if you are a fan of another sports team, this may not be something that's on your radar. Now, we're pretty lenient with people who move to DC and have a different sports team because a lot of us Washingtonians are from someplace else. But it is helpful for you to know, if you're not a football fan at all, that Cowboys is a dirty word.
Insider tip number 10, experiencing history.
One of the most important things about living in DC is you are witness to history. Almost every day there is something historical happening in our nation's capital. And as a new resident, you will get that experience. Whether it is a presidential inauguration and you get to stand on the Mall and watch our new president be sworn in, or whether it is that you get to honor someone who is lying in state in the Capitol. There is nothing like participating in those types of historical events. And as a DC resident, you get the ease and the opportunity to do just that. I got to stand in line to pay my respects to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, John Lewis, John McCain, and it is a wonderful feeling as an American to get to participate in those types of history that just aren't as easy for other residents of our country to do. So make sure that while you're here, you take some time to witness history in your city.
And now for my bonus tip.
One of the last things I want you to know about living in DC are the restaurants. DC has some of the most wonderful restaurants in the country. And for many, many years, our restaurant scene was overlooked. We finally got our first Michelin rankings, and it was something that the entire city seemed to celebrate. We have wonderful local chefs who have tiny restaurants in different neighborhoods. We do have bigger chain restaurants as well. But one of the things you may want to explore as a new DC resident is all of our beautiful restaurants. They have indoor options and outdoor options and takeout options, and all of the chefs are gracious and friendly, and it is a really beautiful way to celebrate with friends and family, or to gather with your friends on a night out.
I hope you've enjoyed these insider tips on living in Washington, D.C. It is one of the greatest cities in the world, and I know you will love living here. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you watch this one next.